Morning. Now, this is an interesting Sunday morning. It's second Sunday with Tom Whitmore, and he has got the dubious honor of he wanted to talk politics this morning, and so he
Toby
brought.
wants to talk politics too, and what Toby wants goes in this house.
Yeah, it is politic time because. But before we get started, I just want to remind you guys, Holiday Leftovers is out there and is done surprisingly well. It went in 2 weeks to, I've been publishing for 6 years, and it went to the top half of our books. And it's just a fun book. And not to forget, especially with the new house out there, post-row alternatives. I mean, we're about to see an attack on, and I call it choice, not just choice for women, but choice for all of us, is about to come under the biggest attack you'll ever seen. It's just going to be hideous. And so knowing that every time you buy one of these books, you're putting money in the hands of the ACLU, and the ACLU is going to be one of the people we're praying for to keep us going. And that was I think the smartest business decision I ever fell into, doing that and buying Karen's first story that she sold us. And so, Tom, since this is your Sunday morning now, let me say one thing. Karen, could you tell us a little bit about what Third Sunday is going to be like?
Yeah. Third Sunday is a group of 4 people who identify as women who are part of the B Cube writing stable. And we're going to get together and bring in folks, mostly writers, but also some publishers, some editors, and some graphic artists to talk about women in science fiction and fantasy and dystopian writing. We're going to talk about being publishers, getting your stuff written, how you design characters, all sorts of stuff. And that's what's going to be going on the 3rd. It's me, it's Brenda.
First Sunday.
First Sunday. It's going to be Phyllis Irene Radford, Brenda Clough, and Jocelyn Reynolds Ward.
Yeah, and
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It looks like it, and also it makes my life so much easier having people with more talent than. That's what I found out about this show. If I get people with more talent than me on the screen, the show does better. So that said, Tom, the first person we picked that had more talent than me.
Penn Jillette said that his ambition was always to be the least intelligent person in the room.
The least what person?
Intelligent person in the room.
Shoot.
To surround himself with people who were smarter than he was.
Unfortunately, a lot of the House of Representatives seems to be going by that as well.
Oh, my God. Yeah. It becomes a competition for the bottom then, which is a lot of what we want to talk about. Why is it that our government is so dysfunctional? Politics has been the realm of the possible for so long. Now they're trying to make things impossible. And how did we come to this? And what are we actually going to do? And what are effective ways for us to attempt to change that? And frankly, Bob, you talked about one of the most effective ways right at the beginning, which is support the ACLU. And Karen has a lot of really interesting ideas about what's going on. We talk about things a lot. And she said, we need to talk about politics this week. And I think she's right. So
I'm just waiting for when we get David and Jim on board to talk about it, because Florida is special. But I got one thing that just bugs the hell out of me, or that says more about what's happening in Washington, D.C. At the same week that we see Mitch McConnell and the President of the United States shaking hands over a deal that fixed a bridge that carries 3% of the GDP of this country, that they have not yet ever been able to get the money to fix. They stood in Ohio or Kentucky. I think they were on the Kentucky end of the border, and they shook hands at the same time. Marjorie Taylor Greene has gone from idiot pariah to idiot spokesperson for Kevin, who was given the privilege of announcing the very first initiative that the House of Representatives is going to undertake, which is to kill the reform bill that got enough IRS auditors to audit the rich in this country.
To pay for the bridge that they were.
Yeah. It's amazing what the House is going to become. It's just hideous.
Yeah, well, and as someone in the chat has said, perhaps Santos should be the poster boy for this Congress. Because,
well, I don't know. I don't want to talk bad about George Santos, because back when we were in the French Foreign Legion together, oh, never mind. I'm just going to let that one go.
When we were palling around on the Champs-Élysées.
Tom, I want to bring up a couple of things that I think will shape this conversation.
Excellent.
And I hope
Please
for
do.
some of the listeners. And I want, as a writer, to talk about the importance right now. When we have looked at politics in the past, commentators and evaluators and researchers have looked at things along particular continuums, right and left, truth and falsehood, progress and stasis. And I think that now we are going to have to look, possibly because of social media, in a different way. I think we have to look at point of view, because things are so disparate in this country and so deeply divided. One of the factors that we have not looked at before a lot is where people are coming at when they look at what is going on. And obviously we have a far right delusional point of view. We also have progressive utopian points of view, which are highly
delusional.
Yes, but we also have the fact that the press has been stuck with, they are in this role of, we are the press and we look at things a certain way. And if we're going to be bad press, we're going to rant and rave. And if we're going to be good press, we're going to look at both sides. The problem this both sidism has caused is discussed in an editorial from the head of Mother Jones, in which she said again and again, mainstream media like the New York Times are referring to the ultra far right like Fox and the ultra far left like Mother Jones. And the Mother Jones person said, so actually reporting facts, fact checking and doing in-depth reporting is called ultra left wing. And it's true. The middle has moved. It's not in between the two factions. The middle is way over towards the right now. There is no ultra far left wing anymore. There really isn't. There was probably in the 60s, but there's not now. And the point of view, I think a lot of voters like myself, a lot of individuals are in a point of view which I would describe as spectator, the point of view of someone who feels utterly powerless. So that's what I want to throw out to start all this. The feeling of the power is concentrated in some very scary places. Not just money is concentrated, but power is concentrated in weird places with a few people. And the rest of us are kind of saying, I voted, but look what we got.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you look at that, I had a mistaken impression that due to gerrymandering, that if you totaled up all the Republican votes for Congress people and all the Democratic votes for Congress people, that there would be probably a 5 or 6% more Democratic votes. No, 52% of America voted Republican in their congressional races. And that tells me that what we consider the right, when 130 of those people voted to overthrow our democracy, and they still walked away with 52% of the votes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the war for democracy is even started. And as the perspective, because when you got 52% of the people in this country would rather have a Republican Congress like we have, that point of view, as you talked about it, Karen, that perspective needs to get understood.
I want to jump in with something else. You talked about the congressional vote, and I think the reason why we're seeing this going on in the House rather than the Senate has to do with the level at which voting is occurring. I do not have the numbers, and I want to get them, and I should get them. I want to look at state level elections, because what I'm seeing again and again is you've got states that are like Washington State that are sending senators from the left and mostly Congress people from the left. But if you go down to Olympia, the state capital of Washington, you'll find that the Republicans are much stronger on the ground than the Democrats. Enough, and that is what's leading to the gerrymandering, which is then leading to a lot of the voting problems. But the Democrats have really, in many states, lost it in terms of controlling or managing elections at the local level, and the local entrenchment of people with right-wing beliefs who are election deniers is very strong.
I think sometimes we do it to ourselves. I mean, take right now, the Republicans have a winning game in the woke contest, because sometimes we as Democrats are so frightened at offending somebody that we're not willing to call something stupid when it's stupid. Like, for example, and I'm going to get hate mail, I know. The male swimmer who said, "I now identify as female," and went out and dominated, what was basically a women's category of sports, because women are different. They don't swim as fast as men, generally. And everybody's falling all over themselves to say, "Oh no, we've got to accept that. We've got to can't reject that, because that's rejecting the ability, the choice to self-identify your gender." Well, I mean, I'm all for being able to self-identify your gender. But sometimes when when that introduces a marked unfairness, it's that resonates with Americans and says the woke agenda isn't fair to the rest of us. And even if it's only one or two people doing it, when you get done making those headlines on Fox News and watching the pieces show up on your Facebook feed, you understand why they're having such a successful time challenging the woke agenda, when the woke agenda is fundamentally tries to build itself around fairness.
Yeah.
Now,
what is, what has been going on ever since the Al Franken scandal is the ability of the left to stop and think when they're accused of unfairness and ambiguity and all these things, and the ability of the right to just shrug it off.
oh yeah, you said Al Franken?
Yeah.
That's an example of where we gave it away.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done it again and again and again.
And we will keep doing it again and again and again.
And whatever happened to the problem of saying, yes, this person screwed up, and we're going to, take whatever steps, but we're going to let them stay in the game.
Which is what they're doing with Santos right now over on the Republican side.
Santos is going to be he is the poster boy for everything that is wrong with this country right now. And part of it is there don't seem he it turns out that lying to the public and getting an office that pays well. This is someone who has not done well financially, and now he has a secure job. Lying to get that job, there don't seem to be any penalties. We have
It's
no, I mean, if you lied to your employer, they fire you. But if you lie to the people of the US who are supposedly your employer, they don't seem to be able to fire you.
Yeah. And how do we actually work with that? How do we work to change that? How do we get the more progressive people to say, yeah, we make mistakes too? One of the problems, of course, is that as the number of people involved gets larger, the number of people out on the edges gets larger too. And there are people who are going to want to exploit the system rather than playing the game. We get more of them just because we've got more people. And one or two of them make a disproportionate effect. They come in and they become more visible, and everybody thinks that they are representing a larger group than they are.
Tom, I want to just underline that that's part of the point of view problem. Something going on around the era of me and the social media that enables people to project themselves into, if this could happen to this person, it must be happening to me. This could happen to my child. This could the ability to identify almost in the same fantastical way that we identify with people we read about in books. People are now identifying with various catastrophes and saying, I could easily be a martyr to this. And it the people that
even more, I already am a martyr to this and I just hadn't realized it.
Bob, you know about Battelle and their work in the nuclear regulatory industry. One of the things Battelle was doing was they were looking at how people quantify risk to themselves. And we as a society are terrible at assessing risk. People find it very unlikely that they will be in a car accident, even though it's very likely, and extremely likely that they will be in a plane accident when, of course, those are pretty rare. And I think that this inability of people to get a grip on what's actually endangering them is part of what's driving the political mess right now. Healthcare is a mess, and yet most people on the right are terrified of socialized medicine. And no one can figure out really why. They're the same people who scream if you try to take away Medicare.
Yeah, now we have corporate medicine as opposed to medicine for all. But your concept of risk, I mean, risk is a very simple factor at its root. It is the probability that something is going to happen times the consequence. So if the probability is 1% that something's going to happen and the consequence is death, then you've basically said you have a 0.01% chance of dying as a result of this. Now, I've watched people in the nuclear industry sit there and who were somewhat radiophobic, afraid of radiation. And they were confident as they stood there smoking their cigarette that the exposure they were getting from radiation was going to kill them. It's ridiculous. I just don't, people are, as you said, very poor with risk perception.
We're also poor with figuring out what actual causes are, right? Because that's another part of risk assessment. After the fact, we think that X caused Y, when in fact, there's so much going on that we can't really tell that. We talk a lot about correlations. One of the things I've been saying recently is our ability to manipulate numbers and statistics is a lot more precise than our ability to define things.
Yeah, it's like causation is, I mean, I looked at early on at the COVID numbers where they were talking about this percent transmittability and this percent death. And I said, holy shit, we're going to lose 2 million Americans before this is done.
Mm-hmm.
And people were laughing at me. You know, I was watching, you know, it's just crazy. I ain't going to wear a mask because my liberties are being taken away, or the shift into risk is the consequences we talk about with schools, you know, where we've now empowered every parent that's got an axe to grind is out there trying to ban books because their kid's going to turn gay because of it.
Yeah,
it's just crazy.
I want to point out something that one of the people said in the chat, which is they think millennials and Gen Z don't have a problem assessing social risk. We're not talking about social risk here. We're talking about physical risk, disease risk, all sorts of other things. Many people have gotten much, much better at assessing the social risk of something they say. But that is not what we are talking about. We are talking about actual physical, this can kill you risk. Social risk is unlikely to kill you unless you kill yourself over it.
I'm going to say that I actually agree with this person. I actually think that millennials and Gen Z are better at, and it's not just social risk, I think they're better at assessing economic risk. You know, it used to be our generation is famous for trusting our employers to give us health insurance and really great pensions. There aren't any pensions anymore. Health insurance is a joke. I have friends working for some of the best companies around. And when it's great, you know, if you want to get prenatal care or something, but if you have cancer, you suddenly discover that your top end health plan doesn't cover any of your cancer drugs. I mean,
or it doesn't cover the doctor that you were.
Yes, it covers. Or your doctor changed plans, so it doesn't cover your doctor anymore. Yeah, I think that the millennials and Gen Z have a lot better grasp at certain types of risk. But I also think that their assessment of risk skews so negative that it's hard for a lot of them to find hope. I think that the backlash of the hope punk movement is part of, yes, things are bad, but what can we look at, you know, that looks good, and how do we achieve those? What those generations are going through is really fascinating, and they're going to be the next group of leaders, and you hope that there are a lot of them coming out, you know, that are going to embrace hope and find some reason to hope.
In regards to the health insurance should never have been tied to employment, there is a really interesting podcast from Throughline called The Everlasting Problem, done October 2020, which looks at how that happened and why that happened. And if you look up Throughline, The Everlasting Problem on Google, you can find both the podcast and a transcript. And I highly recommend anyone who's interested in figuring out how we got here to go look at that. It's an hour long, and it's really, really good history.
Yeah. At midpoint in my career, I had been with a company for a long time, and the pre-existing condition clause was still in effect. And that health insurance and employment suddenly became the fact that if I moved jobs, my diabetes and my wife's rheumatoid arthritis suddenly became pre-existing condition, and it became a great tool for the employers to basically shackle their employees to their desk.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who thinks that's going to get better under this Congress, I'm waiting for the first vote to repeal Obamacare.
There have already been a bunch of those votes, not with this Congress, but getting that past the Senate would be difficult.
Yeah, I know, but you know, they couldn't get it through the Senate when they had a majority.
Yep.
So you're correct.
At some point, I would like to get someone who works in the federal legislature as an aide in here, particularly a committee aide, because one of the real interesting things we have going on in the legislature right now is what it is. Oh God, I can't remember who wrote this. What it is like to be an aide, to be an assistant to a congressperson 30 years ago, when these were these elegant, highly educated people, and they were wheeling and dealing and cutting deals, but they also had people who were just deep in legislative procedure, who knew all kinds of ways to negotiate and get things done, sort of the Lyndon Johnson era of things. To be an aide in those days was incredibly exhilarating. And now, with a lot of the people who are now in the House of Representatives, being an aide is sort of this like being on the campaign trail all year round. It's not about legislation, it's about creating chaos and riling people up. It's more public relations. And I would just love to get someone who is on the ground in to talk with us. I'm going to work on it because I have friends who work in Congress, and I'm looking for somebody who may have left recently who would be willing to talk about this.
I hired a secretary once, or an admin, excuse me, once, who had been a legislative aide in Oklahoma, in the state legislature. The story she was pouring out, it was just crazy. But also look at it. I think it was under when Gingrich came in. One of the first things they did was to help cripple Congress was they cut their staffing budget.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes people to support you and draw up position papers, do research, etc.
And do the support for the constituents,
And
which
one
is a
thing,
major part of what Congress people are supposed to be doing.
but there's also another kind of aid in Congress. It's not an aid to a senator or a congressman. It's a committee staffers. And the committee staffers are really the backbone of Congress. And it would be real interesting to see what the Republicans, if they are in control, are doing to staffing those committees, because those committee staffers, if they have long tenure, they really know what they're doing. If you're bringing in new people, it can get very scary. So,
Yeah, that's the fun part about it.
but what I'm looking at is, where are the Washington Post and New York Times articles about these issues? I mean, I don't want to read any more opinion pieces about how offended a New York Times or a Washington Post person is by what's going on. I want to actually have them report on what's going on. And they're not doing it. If you sit down and you read The Guardian, because if you really want to find out what's going on in the United States, the only way to do it is by reading a foreign newspaper. This is really getting depressing. And I say this as a experienced former journalist. I was with the Hartford Courant and with the New Haven Register, and I can tell you that what's getting reported now is what an intelligent person with a scanner could report. It's very depressing.
Yeah, I think the U.S. media being complicit. Ask me this.
It's not even that it's complicit. It's that it's taken.
It's incompetent.
Yeah, it's taken a path with the way it's maintained in terms of money that leads it not to do anything other than what's easy.
And also, it's the fault of the readers. The readers, who are what's attracted by advertisers, want to read about Lady Gaga. They want to read about Ted Cruz. They want to read about Ted Cruz going on vacation during the flood, when they don't want to read about what Ted Cruz is wheeling and dealing with oil and other interests in Texas. The readers have responded, both on the left and the right, to fluff, and it's become People magazine. And if you go and you look at a skinny little magazine, Mother Jones is actually wonderful but pathetic. It's like this thick, because they're spending all this money doing the hard work of digging up actual information on why the roads are falling apart in this country, why Congress is behaving the way it is, but people aren't buying it and people aren't reading it.
Compare it to Vanity Fair, which is about 4
Actually,
times as thick.
Vanity Fair is actually not bad at the moment. But
Yes, it's not bad, but look at what they do.
I mean, I'm looking at the New York Times, and I would bet you right now that the area of the New York Times that is getting the most eyeballs is The Strategist, where they tell you what kind of blue jeans to buy.
Well, all I know is Mother Jones was the first magazine I ever subscribed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's possibly why I'm a little left. But take George Santos, for example.
We keep getting back to him.
How did that man make it through any kind of press scrutiny?
Yeah.
The press used to assign somebody to follow Gary Hart everywhere he went. Obviously, nobody even looked at Santos's resume during the entire campaign.
Well, I understand that one reporter did make note of it, and they said he's a fringe candidate. It doesn't matter. Let it be. And they said that about Trump, too.
Yeah. We've got to stop saying that people are fringe candidates when they're actually fringe candidates are winning.
Yeah. Now, thank God. I mean, even though the Republicans got more votes for their congressional candidates across the country than the Democrats did, which shocked the hell out of me, the idea that the true fringe candidates, most of them did lose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's going to happen again, because I got to believe that this Congress is going to dig itself a hole. Like right now, who is in charge of any resolution to raise the debt ceiling? There's only one member of the House that can bring a motion to the floor to extend the debt ceiling. Eric Cantor. Go back to 2013. He's the guy that decided it was good politics to shut down the government.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, Eric Cantor being in charge of that tells me everything I need to know investment-wise. 6 weeks before any votes necessary to raise the debt ceiling, sell my stock and save it so that when they finally do raise it, I can buy back the depressed stock.
Wow. Now explain to us how he got into that position. Is it something he was appointed to?
Which committee is he chairing?
Yes.
It's the House Rules, the new House Rules.
Mm-hmm.
They literally name by position. So a fella made a motion here just a day or two ago to do something along those lines, and he was ruled out of order, pointing out that members were no longer allowed to make that motion from the floor. Only Eric Cantor could.
Only the chair of the House Rules Committee rather than Eric Cantor himself.
I believe I think he's called out by position, but in the interviews, he's named by name.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a radical. He's one of the faces that's wrong with America. And they threw him out of Congress. He was so bad. And he got back in.
Mm-hmm.
And then, somebody says that in Colorado, they got Boba. 500 votes. That's all that separated her from history.
Mm-hmm.
A quiet history.
Yes.
And
from being forgotten.
Yeah. Well, it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene is literally, she is the power behind the throne in some cases right now.
Mm-hmm.
And God help us.
Well, and this goes back to one of the failures of journalism, which is they go for the bright and shiny. And people want to see what Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing because it is so outrageous.
Yeah.
It leads to outrage.
Would Trump be president today were it not for the outsized press coverage he got during the primaries?
Because he kept saying outrageous things that would.
Yeah, or maybe would he be a former president today?
Yes. Oh no, he's still president. Just ask a lot of people; they'll tell you he's still the legitimate president.
I'm just going to show my bald spot to the camera because I'm just.
Yep.
I don't know what to say. So, Karen, you did a lot more research.
Karen always does research. It's one of the wonderful things about her.
I actually, I grew up in Washington, D.C., in the D.C. suburbs. I knew a lot of Congress people and their kids. I know a lot. I worked very briefly in Massachusetts in the office of Congressman Gary Studs. I worked in one of his constituent-based offices in Barnstable. And I've always been fascinated by legislative affairs. And then when I was a reporter, I covered city councils and mayoral stuff. And I guess there's always been a lot of corruption. There's always been a lot of wheeling and dealing and favoritism. And I've covered a lot of that as an investigative reporter. But it used to be done kind of back room. In order to catch the school board wheeling and dealing, you would have to go literally place at 11 at night and discover they were all in the back room rigging some deal that they were then going to just without discussion vote on at the board meeting the next day. What's really changed about the political climate is that they do it right in front of everybody and they laugh in the face of the voters. And the voters go back and vote for them again. I just find this astonishing and depressing. And there's really, the system is increasingly rigged, but at the bottom of it all, we have to accept that our friends, the people we graduated from college and high school with, our neighbors are going out and voting for these terrible and amoral people who are laughing at them. And what does that mean about American society? That we are electing essentially Santos is Bart Simpson, and we are happily electing him.
Yeah.
I
don't know what to do about that. I wish I did.
Well, he's created a new subcommittee, McCarthy, that is going to be packed with the oh God, what do we call it? The Freedom Caucus, that is being given access to all data that is the same level of clearance and ability to get information as the Intelligence Committee. And they're being tasked to go in and investigate the DOJ, the FBI, and all of this stuff. We're going to see an unprecedented, probably not since the Newt, we have seen this level of attack on the institutions of government that we're about to see. Because I think if you look back to the history of Newt Gingrich's 1994 class, you're going to see what we're up for. I expect there to be an impeachment, several impeachments hearings.
Oh, yeah. Well, impeachments are becoming what happens regularly, and that's really rather frightening.
Well, what's funny is Clinton got impeached for lying about oral sex.
Mm-hmm.
Trump got impeached for trying to overthrow democracy. And in the eyes of many people, those are the same. If
there are many people who think they're the same, but they're seen as equally heinous by different groups of people.
Well,
but they're not seen as the same.
I I I have a question that's come in from one of the Facebook people, and they said, Karen, would you want to go in and clean up the mess these people make? Or would you rather leave them in office and deal with the results? And I actually think we are at the point where the longer they are in office, the more structures, in fact, their sole purpose is to build structures so they will never leave office.
Hmm.
And I actually think that it is imperative that the people in control of what's left of the justice system go after them now for everything, because they will become immune. And when I say they, I don't mean the individuals. I think we saw last week how very willing these people are to sacrifice, trample one or two of their own in the mob madness. They they are not a loyal group. They're each out for their own. And I think it's really important that people ramp it up and the Department of Justice go after them before the Department of Justice returns to the control of somebody who doesn't want to go after anybody.
I also think the comment that Cheryl Alexander made, that voters don't think that bad policies will affect them individually, is a large part of what's going on here. They believe that, oh, that's just going to affect the other part of the country. And this is a weird disconnect from the thing that Karen was talking about at the beginning, about how everybody thinks that things that go wrong will affect them. That people identify with the people who are being, quote, oppressed, end quote, in some way, rather than finding the nuance about what's actually going on. They just think, oh no, this could happen to me. But they don't think that in terms of the policy decisions that are going on. And I'm not quite sure how this disconnect happens. Any thoughts?
that's a Karen answer. I know my thoughts on it.
No, Bob, you go for it. I'm sitting here fuming silently about IRS issues because I have something to say about the IRS. But
Yeah.
Say that again, Karen.
I want to throw that to Bob because I want to talk about the IRS in a bit. Bob, you go with it.
Oh, well, what was the question, Tom? My brain, I got the attention.
The question was, how do people both think that they're going to be the victim of something going wrong, and we need to have these activists in there making sure that that doesn't happen? They're going to lose all of their money from the fact that the socialists are taking over. But they also don't think that they're going to be the victim of the laws that Congress is passing that are going to make things more difficult.
Well, that's a simple question. Everybody who gets in their car has the same thought. I'm not going to have the car accident. I'm going to be okay. Bad things happen to other people. Only think about the overwhelming majority of lower income people voting for Republicans, voting against their own self-interest, thinking that, my God, I might not be able to afford to go to a dentist, but thank God I'm not in a socialist world, because the Republicans have been incredibly effective at branding. Mm-hmm. And their ability to brand anything that's not waving a flag and carrying an M16 and having a bumper sticker that says, I support our troops, is a socialist. And they've just been good at branding.
Barb Rowe comments, too many people in this country are stuck in a permanent adolescence in which they think they're invulnerable and bad stuff only happens to other people. And I want to step in and say, Odette, that one of the consequences of the COVID infection affects brains in such a way that they function a lot more like an adolescent brain. What it turns out to be impaired, even with very minor experience with COVID is your ability to assess risk and make judgment. And it's the I think that going 300 years into the future, that people looking back on what went on now are going to actually factor the psychological impact of, well, the physiological impact of COVID on the brain, on the way that people globally are
Except,
being governed.
except an awful lot of this governance was happening before COVID hit.
I know. I think that COVID exacerbates it.
Yes, I would agree with you about that.
You know,
And
another thing,
somebody comments, they're not voting against their self-interest. They're voting against our concept of their self-interest. They believe they're voting.
one other thing that I want to bring up about people's perceptive on stuff is that I think that a lot of folks are looking at what's going on right now. We have historically in this country around general well-being, everything has depended. Your boat rose and fall went up and down with everyone else's. If we were in a recession, it was difficult for almost everybody to do certain things. If we are in a point where there aren't any jobs, it was hard for lots of people to get jobs. And I now think that we're seeing this not distributed as easily, that some people are getting off the hook because they are extremely wealthy. Even if our economy suffered terrible impact right now, I think the rich are so rich that they wouldn't notice it. Instead of having 11 houses, they might now have just 6.
Yeah. Elon Musk can lose half his money and not really notice it.
I think in very few cases will you see, rich people really suffering, because what it is to be rich is so much richer now than it used to be. And yet the middle class remains on the edge, and any sort of economic fluctuation affects the middle class tremendously. Their child may not be able to go to college. I mean, it's very tenuous unless you have this enormous, unrealistic cushion of money.
I don't know if you've caught the story on the movement of millionaires to Florida. Because of the tax policies in Florida, they are basically harvesting millionaires from other states and bringing them in. And the long-term consequences, the only data that's available goes back to 2020. But if you consider as the guy doing the story said, I can project this out to 2022. And when you look at the percentage of taxes that a millionaire pays in Florida versus what a millionaire pays in New York is heading for hell, because they're about to lose their tax base, even though they're producing huge amounts of money. Now that those people can do that same job down in Florida and pay a lot less taxes. And hey,
so this segues us back into what Karen wanted to talk about with the IRS, I think.
Well,
yeah, let's go to Karen on the IRS. Good call, Tom.
Well, I want to preface this by saying I spend a lot of time in Florida. My mother lives in Naples, Florida, which is one of the wealthiest cities in the United States. And it is filled with people doing exactly what Bob has just said. And it is hard to assess the difference in economic climate until you've actually lived it. My mother has retired to Florida 35 years ago. My mother's 104. And she briefly moved to Washington State. And when she moved here, she was horrified to discover she couldn't get a cardiologist. And that was because Medicare reimbursement rates vary by state. And in Washington State, cardiologists are paid peanuts to see an old person. So a lot of them just don't take Medicare. They don't take old clients. They don't take old people. In Florida, because of congressional fidgeting with reimbursement rates, the cardiologists and everyone else make so much money taking a Medicare patient, that they will send a taxi to pick you up to bring you to their office. And very few people are aware of this enormous disparity in Medicare payments state by state. But I can tell you this, if you're old and have health problems, you want to live in Florida. It is a truly scary thing. Going back to the issue of the IRS, I was fascinated that McCarthy wanted to pull back the beefing up of the IRS, because the IRS, like the judiciary, is something you can really weaponize against your enemies. And I'm actually surprised the Republicans haven't gone with the beefing up of it, but then merely directed the IRS to audit Democrats, because the IRS has been so flabby for the past several years that hardly anybody's been audited at all. And I can tell you right now that a lot of mid-sized businesses are doing some pretty dicey stuff because nobody's getting looked at anymore. Bob, play with that one. Why doesn't McCarthy want to weaponize or beef up the IRS? Are the Republicans really that afraid of it?
No, it's the Republican philosophy is to get rid of the government.
But they're not getting rid of the police and the judiciary.
But they are trying to get rid of anything the government has that needs money.
Yeah, oversight is their objective, to end any legitimate oversight of businesses, any environmental regulations, any OSHA regulations. They see those as barriers. They don't want to fix the immigration issue because a lot of their people are making huge amounts of money off of hiring non-documented workers and paying them crap. Until we fix these things, I mean, do you really think that the border crisis, that the Republicans have got anything that they want to do besides build a wall? No.
Well, no.
They don't want to solve any of these problems.
And as if building a wall would solve the problem, all we have to do is look at the Maginot Line. You know, building a wall or the Great Wall of China, they don't solve the problem. They just push it away.
Yeah. And what one Facebook says, get rid of the regulations and the economic structure goes completely feral. We get laissez-faire capitalism. And that basically means that we may as well get back to company towns and black lung.
Well, we do get back to company towns. You know.
Yeah, we will.
West Virginia and Manchin is a great example of a company state. An industry owns that state and they own Manchin.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And right now, the pharmaceutical industry is big enough. I mean, if you don't think that cinema is owned by the pharmaceuticals,
you haven't been watching How She Votes.
Yeah. Yeah. A Facebook user made a scary point that the Republican fascists own the police. I mean, right now, I watched as the Black Lives Matter movement, and as I got a little more active in protests, the number of efforts that were made by people to ban protests, make it essentially illegal to carry out a protest.
Well, a particular kind of protest.
Yeah, one
because
where
people still in favor of other kinds. Yeah.
And if people want to look at what the next 4 years are going to look like for the country, really look at Florida. Look at what Santos is doing. Santos is an extremely, in the fascist sense of it, an incredibly effective leader. He's relatively young. He's good looking. He's got an extremely efficient staff. He's spent years building up his people, some of whom I actually know from where my mother lives.
Yeah.
One of his top
DeSantis rather than Santos.
Yeah, DeSantis. DeSantis is one of his best friends, worked his way up in Naples as the head of the local hospital. Now he is either a state senator or a state congressperson. But DeSantis has spent years building this structure. And if you want to see what's going to happen in the United States and what it's going to be like to live there, look very closely at what's going on in Florida. And you can feel it if you just spend time there.
So what do we do?
That is always the big question. What can we do?
Well, I think one thing, I think one of the best things we can do, we're all of an age, is to get behind the younger politicians.
Mhm.
And instead of looking at them and saying, they're spending too much time being sanctimonious about woke politics, is to get in there and simply say, we'd like to help you. And we would like to help you address key issues around infrastructure, gerrymandering, all these sort of things. And if you, as our young representatives, want to get behind these issues, we'd like to donate to your campaign and we'd like to get on the ground and help you out. But I think no candidate is going to do every single thing you want. And right now, I think we need, I mean, a lot of the candidates that progressive candidates I have traditionally supported, like Patty Murray, are old. I need to get in, find the young people I really believe in, and give them some of my resources and help and tell them what will make me want to vote for them, because they are out there and they are starting to win office. And I think getting in behind them and letting them go out there and get on a field and fight with people like McCarthy is the way to go.
I think you've hit it on the head there, Karen. America is going to be run in 20 years by former mayors, former school board members, former city councilmen, and the Republicans took that. I mean, they just got in, and they are dominating school boards, establishing their names, their faces, their perspectives. I mean,
Making people think they're reasonable.
And they're really having, I'm seeing a lot of women in their late 30s who are starting to get into politics, and they're progressive, and they are getting death threats, rape threats, attack on their family threats. They're getting doxxed. Anything that we can do to help these women persist and not drop out. I'm watching someone in your area, Bob, who's just gone through hell after running for school board. And we really need to provide cover and support for these folks and let them know we're not going to let them get taken down.
And that's where it's so hard. I mean, I think I know who you're talking about. She was a teacher. She was running for school board, and she got up against some local right-wing Republican politician who was using the school board as a stepping stone. And in our county, Republicans are 60-70%. And here it was, nonpartisan race, a qualified person. I thought she could do a good job. And boom. The guy that she lost to was forced to resign because I don't remember what he did, but he was so radical, he even annoyed the parents around here. Because around here, unlike a lot of places, our parents are Republicans, but they're also one of the best educated groups of people in the country, and they recognize BS when they saw it.
I also really want to urge people to be on the lookout at the local level, because the Republicans have been very, very effective, terribly effective at the grassroots level. Look for any movement to change independent, nonpartisan elections to ones that are party oriented, because the problem with party orientation is people will knee-jerk vote for the candidate from their party instead of thinking about what the nonpartisan person is offering. And my radical desire, if I could change politics in this country right now, I would make it illegal to label yourself as being from a party. And I would want every candidate to get out there as an individual. That's never going to happen, but that's my fantasy.
Well, let me ask you this, Karen. I think that this Congress is going to be so bad that for the first time in a long time I could see a third party developing out of it, where you will see 30 Democrats, 60 Republicans meet together in some hall and say, okay, guys, this just can't go on. And they might become the deal breaker.
Isn't that what the Lincoln Project is trying to build?
Say that again.
Lincoln Project.
The Lincoln Project. I look for people. I recommend people to take a look at the Lincoln Project. That they are Republicans with a conscience, and they're. But I think that people are going to have to step away from the Republican and the Democratic names. I think they're just going to have to step away.
I am reminded of a city council vote in Berkeley where there were 4 people who were running for 4 positions as a slate. And one of them commented, well, we've got the liberal vote, the conservative vote, and the moderate vote. And in most cities, that's the entire electorate. In Berkeley, it might be enough to let us win. They won 3 out of the 4 seats rather than all 4. So, we need to be able to, getting rid of the parties would be a great start.
Someone made the comment, there have to be moderate Republican politicians somewhere. There are. And one of the very greatest one who, when he was the Attorney General of the state of Washington, Democrats said he was better to work for than Chris Gregoire, Rob McKenna. One of the most amazing, I would vote for Rob McKenna. He was a good Republican and just a fine man and a spectacular administrator who I very much expected to see become a senator or governor, who I expected to see, in Washington at some point, possibly as president of the United States. He vanished because the Republicans, even more than they hate left-wingers, I think they hate moderate Liz Cheney, more than they hate Democrats. I think they are more interested in burning out that section of their party than they are in beating Democrats.
And right now, I would have once said that's a recipe for failure. But even though they keep burning out the moderates, they keep getting elected. I go back to the fact that 52% of America voted for a Republican in Congress today.
Yeah. Well, in a statistical sense, if you've got a unimodal distribution, your basic normal distribution with the center being the biggest thing, it's a good idea to have 2 parties that are as close as possible, because that's the way to get one vote over 50%, which is what you want. If you've got a bimodal distribution where there are 2 major lines of thoughts and each one is sort of centered off to the side, then parties that get more radical, in fact, become much more viable. And at the moment, we're looking at a country with a bimodal distribution on a whole lot of ways of thinking, which means this is how the 2-party system fails. And I think we may be at the point where that's going to happen just mathematically.
I have an issue in which we're not bimodal. And it's interesting because it stands out from the other issues. And it's abortion. The majority of Americans believe that there are circumstances under which doctors should be able to provide abortions. And yet the Republican Party remains even though the public is in a fairly normal distribution, the parties remain separated on that one.
Yeah.
Well, you'll find that on gun control. You'll find, right now, people don't want to go to Walmart and see a 19-year-old kid walking out of the bathroom with 6 handguns and body armor.
Yeah. We want that anyway. Yeah.
We're actually developing the planks for that third party.
Yeah.
Access to reasonable access to early term abortion and gun control.
And as somebody may have pointed out, that when I was cleaning out the back room, I found where I had I mean, I own guns. I'm not wanting to see everybody banned from owning a gun. Um, but I don't think guns belong open carry in restaurants. Um, I mean, even down in Texas, you'll see signs at banks, no guns allowed.
I wonder why.
Well, there are also bars here in Washington where you see signs, no guns allowed, because, bartenders have the right to say, you can't bring a gun in here, which is out of our lawless past, but it's still on the books.
I just fundamentally believe that if you go into the preamble to the Constitution, which should be considered a guiding statement, where is our, you'll hear the right wingers talk about right to life when they're talking about a cell cluster the size of my fingernail. But where is their right to life for the people walking the streets, the people going shopping, the people going to school, the people going to movies? They don't care about their right to life because that might cost them a frickin' vote of that fringe.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are now well into our overtime, and I think that we've gone about as far as we can.
I would like to see us talk about that ranked choice voting before we call it a day. I mean, I will appreciate.
Tom's our statistics guy.
Well, ranked choice voting is, I think, really good when it's properly used, but in Seattle, they just passed a thing where they're doing ranked choice voting for the primary, and then, yes, a vote on the two best, which is really silly, I think. I mean, I think that doesn't work particularly well. But ranked choice is what we use for the Hugos, basically.
I like the fact that in Washington State, the top two go in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the question is, do you do ranked choice? Do you do approval voting? Do you do et cetera? How do you figure out what, quote, the top two is?
Well, if you're right now, we do the top two with a straight majority.
With a strict one vote, one person.
Yeah. And you still get one vote, one person, more or less. If everybody gets two votes, then it works out that when you figure it out, everybody has equal access to the polls. Everybody has equal access to vote.
Yes, it's important that everybody have equal access to vote. But the question of how you tally the votes results in stuff that gets really arcane, and we don't have time to cover that here by any means. Because
true, but if you say that, I like this guy, but if he's out, this guy's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically the concept of ranked choice voting. It will peel out your radicals. It will force the candidates to be listen to more than just the gun nuts.
Yeah, it can. But there are several things that will do that. Approval voting will do that too, which is where you get to vote for as many people as you actually like. And then all the votes get added up, and everybody has the same number of votes, but not everybody uses the same number of votes.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I mean, everybody has their pet, but I think we've shown that ranked choice voting has worked in Alaska.
Mm-hmm. Ranked choice voting, with the amount of computing power we have these days, is not as bad as it would have been, say, 100 years ago.
No.
100 years ago, it would have been a complete nightmare. But with what we have in terms of computers now, it's relatively easy. Designing the ballots is a solvable problem. But it is a problem. There are a bunch of ways.
Obviously, Florida knows how to design ballots. Remember the beautiful butterfly ballot?
There are problems with any design.
Well, that was deliberate.
Yeah.
But, okay, guys, you're right, Tom. Karen, Thank you. And by the way, you can read Karen's work. Hold up your books there, Karen.
Well, senior spinner.
They're actually all here, Bob. Alternative Deathiness, the Protest Diaries, Post-Row Alternatives, and Holiday Leftovers.
Now I'm going to pump the post-row alternatives again because that book is critical. I posted the reviews we got off of that book. And
reading Adam Troy Castro's story in here is an absolute must. It is a game changer.
Adam Troy Castro, you know, I don't know where his head was when he wrote it, but it was in a creative, brilliantly creative space. And
Karen's story is good too.
Karen's
story is really good in there too.
Oh yeah, your story got pointed out in the reviews as much as did Adam's, because you wrote a story where it said choice is choice all the way around. Either you have the right to choose or you don't have the right to choose. And if society can pressure you into an abortion,
that's just as bad.
Then you don't have choice. And it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And Karen, you're also involved in a project we have coming up that we're working on heavily, which is looking at the consequences of this type of thing, because the world is more evenly approaching the world we've got in our outline.
Yeah.
So I'll warn you guys, BQ Press has got a blockbuster of a series of books coming out, and Karen's part of it, and we'll be releasing more in the future. And next week we'll be having Cliff Winning on here.
One of my favorite short story writers. Cliff is great.
He is a hoot to be with, and I just thank everybody for coming. And Tom, thank you for hosting our.
You're totally welcome. This one was, I hope to get somebody else. I failed. We'll see if we'll have somebody much better next time around. But I doubt we could do better than Bob and Karen.
Karen is good. Anytime you get her on the camera.
Yep. I also want to remind folks that Karen is working on a new set of B Cubed Sunday mornings. That'll be started. When is that starting? When's the first of those going to be?
I think February 5th.
February 5th, the first Sundays. So watch for that, because that's going to be that's going to kick ass. It
will, because I have to say, what drove it, and this is a confession, that I had a show where I had Brenda Clough, Irene Radford, and
Jocelyn.
Who?
Jocelyn? Was Jocelyn the other person?
No, Joyce.
Joyce.
Joyce General Reynoldsward. And you guys may have noticed that when Tom's got his show, I'll come in and start, and then I'll disappear. And when I've got David and Jim doing last Sunday, I'll often disappear in the middle of their going because they're doing so well. And when these women got on and started going, I realized, I can turn my screen off and get a cup of coffee and watch them work, because the synergy was so incredible. And so letting that happen is going to be very exciting.
I also want to give a shout out to all the people who have been commenting in the chat, because the chat brings up stuff that's really important that we don't have time to get to all the time, but we have some of the best listeners on this show.
Absolutely. And you guys are awesome. And if I can let that be our final word, wave goodbye, folks, unless you got something you want to add. Okay. Take care, and
see you in a month.
See you
or next week.